The wealthy woman, for the first time in years, felt vulnerable. Her power and wealth had often allowed her to influence situations, to intimidate or dismiss those she considered beneath her. Now, she was confronted by someone whose authority did not rely on money or status, but on integrity, knowledge, and quiet strength. The realization sank in, and she felt an unfamiliar humility. Across the room, the waitress continued her work. Each smile she offered other customers felt genuine, her movements more confident than before. She had not only survived the encounter, but had grown through it. It was a lesson in patience, resilience, and the quiet power of remaining true to oneself. The owner approached the wealthy woman once more, her tone calm but firm. She reminded her politely that respect should be mutual, and that every person in the restaurant, from staff to diners, deserved dignity. The words were not harsh, yet they carried undeniable authority. The wealthy woman lowered her gaze, silently acknowledging her misjudgment. Other diners, having witnessed the interaction, felt a subtle change in atmosphere. Some whispered to each other, amazed at how gracefully the situation had been handled. The tension that had hung heavily over the room had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of justice and balance. The restaurant seemed warmer, more welcoming, as if the event had reinforced the values that guided it. The waitress carried plates and refilled glasses with renewed energy. She felt lighter, not just because the difficult moment had passed, but because she had learned a powerful lesson herself. Strength was not measured by loud words or aggression, but by patience, composure, and integrity. Each small act of professionalism had mattered, and now she felt the reward of inner pride. The wealthy woman finished her meal in silence. The vibrant confidence that had entered the restaurant earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet reflection. She had been forced to confront her own behavior and to see the consequences of her actions in a very public way. Though embarrassed, there was a hint of growth within her, a realization that wealth alone could not command respect. The owner moved through the restaurant, checking on each staff member. She offered encouragement, small words of praise, and a reassuring presence. The team felt supported and valued, their efforts recognized not just by words, but by a leader who truly understood their work. It was a reminder that leadership was about more than authority. It was about empathy, fairness, and guidance. The evening wore on, and the atmosphere in the restaurant became calmer and more relaxed. Diners enjoyed their meals, staff worked confidently, and the challenging encounter seemed like a distant memory, though its impact lingered. The waitress, walking between tables, reflected on the events and felt a sense of accomplishment she had never expected. The wealthy woman eventually left, her pace slower, her head slightly bowed. She had come with an expectation of control and dominance, but left with a lesson in humility. The restaurant had shown her, without anger or confrontation, that respect and kindness were not commodities to be bought, but principles to be lived. After the door closed, the staff gathered briefly to discuss the night. The manager praised the waitress for her composure and professionalism. The owner smiled warmly, letting everyone know that the true strength of the restaurant lay in the dedication and integrity of the people who worked there. The sense of pride and unity among the staff was palpable. For the waitress, the night became a memory of personal triumph. She had faced rudeness, insults, and unfair treatment, yet she had responded with grace. Her actions had earned recognition not through loud words or confrontation, but through patience, professionalism, and integrity. It was a lesson in resilience that she would carry forever. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. The music, soft and warm, filled the space. Diners continued to enjoy their meals, unaware of the deep lesson that had unfolded earlier. The waitress moved gracefully, her spirit lighter, her confidence strengthened. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful victories were quiet, internal, and deeply human. The evening ended with a sense of completion, of lessons learned and dignity preserved. The wealthy woman had left with a new understanding. The waitress had grown stronger, and the restaurant had quietly reinforced its values of respect, professionalism, and human kindness. Everyone present had been touched in some way, reminded that true character could not be measured by wealth or arrogance, but by how one treated others in moments of challenge and adversity. The story of that night would remain with the staff, a reminder of the power of grace under pressure and the impact of integrity. It was a true testament to human resilience and the enduring importance of respect, a lesson far more valuable than any sum of money or fleeting status could ever be. The owner moved toward the table, her steps calm and unhurried. Her gaze was steady, but there was a quiet warning in it. The atmosphere shifted completely. Other diners paused mid-conversation, sensing something significant was about to unfold. The restaurant, once filled with low murmurs of normalcy, became tense yet quiet, almost holding its breath. When the owner reached the table, she addressed the wealthy woman directly, her voice clear but composed. There was no anger, no shouting, just a calm, authoritative presence. She asked if everything was satisfactory and whether the service had met expectations. Her tone was polite, but it carried weight. The wealthy woman's cheeks reddened. She could not meet the owner's gaze. She mumbled that yes, everything was fine, but her tone betrayed her discomfort. The owner's eyes lingered on her for a moment, making it clear that disrespectful behavior would not be overlooked. Turning slightly, the owner's attention shifted to the young waitress. She placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance and acknowledgement. The waitress felt a surge of pride and relief. She realized that the owner had noticed not just her work, but her composure under pressure. It was a moment that made all the harsh words and stress worthwhile. The wealthy woman finally spoke, but her words lacked their previous sharpness. She stammered, attempting a smile that did not reach her eyes. She apologized, though awkwardly, and tried to regain some sense of control. The owner listened patiently, her presence calm yet firm, conveying the message that genuine respect and humility were expected. Other diners could not help but notice the dramatic change. Some whispered quietly to each other, exchanging looks of surprise and curiosity. The energy in the room shifted from tension to fascination. The young waitress moved quietly to continue her duties, but she could feel the pride in the glances the owner had given her. She had stood strong, and now it was being recognized. The wealthy woman, meanwhile, struggled internally. She had always used her wealth and status as a shield, a way to assert power over others. Now, she faced someone who commanded respect without relying on money, someone who could see through arrogance and entitlement. The realization hit her hard. She froze, unable to formulate a response that would restore her former confidence. The owner spoke briefly again, not to lecture, but to remind everyone in the restaurant of the values they upheld: respect, professionalism, and kindness. Her words, though soft, carried weight, resonating with both staff and guests. It was clear that the power here was not in wealth or appearance, but in character, fairness, and integrity. The wealthy woman, feeling the weight of her behavior, looked down at the table. Her previous smirk and confidence were gone. She realized she had underestimated not just the restaurant, but the people who ran it, the staff who worked with dedication, and the values they upheld. The waitress continued her work, serving other tables, but she moved with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Every challenge of the evening had been met with patience and professionalism. The recognition from the owner made her feel validated, proud of how she handled the situation. It was a quiet triumph, one that required no loud applause or dramatic gestures. The owner moved back toward the counter after addressing the table. She cast another reassuring glance at the waitress, who met it with a grateful nod. The wealthy woman, still at her table, no longer knew what to say. She had come with the expectation of dominating the situation, but was now confronted with humility and the realization that true respect could not be bought. The rest of the diners resumed their meals, though many glanced occasionally at the table, intrigued by the sudden turn of events. The room's energy softened, returning to its calm, pleasant ambience, but now it carried a sense of justice quietly witnessed. The waitress, though busy, felt lighter. She understood that she had been tested, and she had passed with dignity. It was a lesson in resilience and self-respect, and the acknowledgement from someone she admired made it even more meaningful. The wealthy woman's presence had caused tension, but it had also set the stage for a powerful lesson about humility and the consequences of underestimating others. The night was far from over, but the pivotal moment had already occurred, leaving everyone in the restaurant with a story to remember, a moment of human connection and lesson in respect that would linger long after the evening ended. The night with her dignity still intact. M knew how much it was about to change. Evening air in the restaurant was calmer now, though still charged with the memory of what had just happened. The wealthy woman sat at her table, her posture tense and her eyes fixed on her hands. The sense of superiority she had carried in from the street was gone, replaced by unease and a deep, quiet realization that she had been wrong. The waitress, meanwhile, moved carefully between tables, offering drinks, clearing plates, and checking on guests. She had regained her rhythm, but now she felt something she had not felt before: recognition. The subtle nod from the owner, the brief word of encouragement, it all meant more than anyone could see. She understood that she had endured a difficult test, and she had passed it with poise. Some of the diners who had witnessed the tension earlier now smiled at the waitress as she passed by. They recognized the courage it took to maintain composure under such pressure. Small gestures of appreciation and quiet compliments made her feel valued. It was not the kind of recognition that comes from money or status, but from genuine respect. The wealthy woman, realizing she could not regain control of the situation, tried to speak, but her words faltered. She offered a hesitant apology to the waitress, but it came out awkward, forced, and incomplete. The waitress simply nodded, accepting the gesture without needing more. Her focus was on maintaining calm and professionalism. The owner returned to the main dining area, moving quietly, but with a presence that commanded attention. She checked in on the other staff members, her eyes kind and observant. The entire team felt a sense of unity and reassurance under her guidance. Her presence reminded everyone that respect and fairness were the foundations of the place, and that dignity could not be taken away by insults. The manager respected the waitress's professionalism and wanted her to finish the interaction on her own terms. He hoped she knew how much they all supported her. The waitress wiped her hands and straightened her uniform. She reminded herself why she worked here. This job was not just about money. It was about pride, about proving to herself that she could rise above cruelty without losing her dignity. Every day was a test, but she refused to fail. Back at the table, the wealthy woman continued to look around. She tapped her fingers on the table impatiently, clearly expecting someone to notice her dissatisfaction immediately. She sipped her water and frowned. When the waitress returned, she made another small complaint, as if searching for any flaw to point out. Despite the woman's harsh words, the waitress maintained her calm. She answered every question with patience and a gentle tone, as if speaking to someone who did not want to listen. Her heart thumped in her chest, but she controlled her breathing, telling herself that no matter how harsh words could feel, they could not define her. Some diners in the restaurant whispered among themselves. A young couple at a nearby table exchanged looks of sympathy, while an older gentleman shook his head in quiet disapproval. Everyone could feel the tension, yet no one wanted to step into the moment and make it worse. The woman leaned back and made a sharp comment about the other customers. She implied that they were beneath her in taste and judgment. The waitress heard it and swallowed hard, but she did not respond. She had learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In the kitchen, staff members kept glancing at the dining area. They admired the waitress's composure. Some had worked in restaurants for years and said they had never seen someone handle such a difficult guest with such grace. A quiet pride spread among the team. They all hoped the woman would not ruin the night for everyone else. The waitress moved carefully around the room, serving other customers as well. She smiled and joked gently with them, trying to maintain a normal environment. She wanted to make sure everyone else enjoyed their evening despite the one unpleasant table. The wealthy woman finally started her meal. She picked at the food and made small comments, critiquing the presentation and the taste. Every word was meant to belittle, yet the waitress held her composure. She reminded herself that the woman's opinion did not define the value of her work or the quality of the restaurant. While serving, the waitress caught herself glancing at the owner's office, just beyond the kitchen. The thought crossed her mind that the owner would eventually arrive. She wondered what it would be like when they did. The staff often said the owner had a way of noticing every detail and rewarding those who deserved it. Time passed slowly. Each interaction with the woman felt like a test of endurance. The waitress's arms ached from carrying dishes, and her feet throbbed from standing, but she refused to let her frustration show. She moved with care, keeping her voice soft and her expressions neutral. Meanwhile, the woman noticed the restaurant's patrons enjoying themselves despite her criticisms. She frowned, clearly annoyed that her presence did not command the attention she expected. Her irritation grew, and she leaned forward, speaking louder this time, making a comment that drew the eyes of several diners. The waitress froze briefly. She could feel the embarrassment creeping back, but she reminded herself that dignity was not measured by the approval of the rude. She smiled politely and stepped back, giving the woman space while keeping her service professional. In the back of the room, the manager gave the waitress a reassuring look. He knew the situation could escalate, but he also knew the owner had a way of handling things perfectly. The staff waited quietly, trusting that their leader's arrival would bring balance to the tense atmosphere. The woman's complaints became sharper, now criticizing the restaurant itself, questioning its reputation, and suggesting it should be run differently. The words were biting, yet the waitress continued without flinching. She had learned to separate herself from the venom in people's words. Each small task, from refilling water to clearing empty plates, became an exercise in patience. The waitress reminded herself that the woman's attitude reflected her, not the waitress. She repeated the mantra silently. She was skilled. She was professional, and she deserved respect. As the evening wore on, the restaurant's calm environment contrasted sharply with the tension at the woman's table. Other customers ate, laughed quietly, and enjoyed their meals. Some glanced occasionally at the scene, curious but not wanting to interfere. The waitress continued to serve, silently hoping that the difficult interaction would end soon. She glanced at the clock, noting how long she had been handling the situation without losing composure. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture, determined to finish her shift with pride intact. Little did she know, the night was about to change in a way no one expected. The arrival of someone important would turn the situation upside down. What seemed like an ordinary, difficult evening would soon become a moment that no one in the restaurant would forget. SED on one thing only. Getting through the restaurant hummed quietly with soft music and the chatter of diners. The waitress moved between tables, refilling glasses, taking orders, and ensuring everyone was comfortable. She had almost gotten used to the difficult woman at the window table, though each word still stung a little. Still, she remained professional, determined not to let the negativity affect her work. Suddenly, the front door opened with a gentle push. A gust of cool air swept through the restaurant. Everyone looked up briefly, some out of curiosity, others instinctively, but most returned to their meals. A person who entered walked with a calm confidence. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet authority that seemed to command attention without words. The wealthy woman at the table turned, her head immediately. Her eyes widened, and her hand froze midway to her fork. For the first time since she had arrived, she did not have a word to say. Her previous confidence faltered. She blinked, hardly believing what she saw. The waitress noticed the change instantly. Her heart skipped a beat. The person who had just entered was someone she had heard stories about, someone known to be respected in the restaurant community and beyond. This person was the owner of the restaurant. Yet, in that moment, she looked from the table to the entrance with quiet anticipation. Unsure what would happen next. The wealthy woman's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She tried to maintain composure, but the flush on her face betrayed her. She had expected this restaurant to be small and unimportant, a place where she could flaunt her wealth and influence. Instead, the very person she had underestimated was here, and everything shifted. The owner's eyes scanned the room, calm yet observant. She noticed the young waitress near the counter and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, silently showing support. The waitress felt a rush of relief mixed with awe. She had never met the owner in person, but she knew of her reputation respected for her fairness, intelligence, and kind yet strong nature. The wealthy woman finally found her voice, though it was quieter, strained, and uncertain. She stammered, trying to sound casual, but her tone lacked its former sharpness. Her eyes darted nervously between the owner and the waitress. She had clearly realized that the person she had mocked, the staff member she had insulted, now stood in the presence of someone with authority, someone who commanded respect. The restaurant sat on a quiet street, away from the busy city noise. It was not flashy, but it had a warm feeling. Soft lights glowed through the windows, and the smell of fresh food drifted outside. Inside, tables were neatly placed, and calm music played low in the background. People came here to relax, not to be seen. That evening, the door opened with a sharp sound. A well-dressed woman stepped inside, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. Her clothes were expensive, her bag looked like it cost more than a month's rent, and her face carried a look of boredom. She paused near the entrance and scanned the room as if judging it. She did not smile. Her eyes moved slowly from the walls to the tables, then to the people sitting inside. Her lips pressed together. It was clear she had expected something grander, something that matched her idea of importance. A young waitress noticed her right away. She had been working since early morning and was already tired, but she straightened her back and walked over with a polite smile. She wore a simple uniform and had her hair tied neatly. Her voice was soft but confident when she greeted the woman and welcomed her in. The wealthy woman barely looked at her. She sighed, as if the greeting itself was an inconvenience. Without returning the smile, she asked for the best table, speaking in a sharp tone. The waitress nodded and gently led her toward a table near the window. As they walked, the woman's eyes kept roaming. She noticed small things and seemed unhappy with all of them. The chairs were too simple. The tables were too close. The music was too quiet. Each thought showed on her face. Once seated, the woman dropped her bag on the table instead of the chair. She crossed her arms and leaned back, staring at the waitress. The waitress handed her a menu with both hands and politely asked if she would like water. The woman frowned at the menu. She flipped it open and closed it again, as if annoyed by its weight. She questioned why the menu looked so plain and asked if the restaurant could afford better printing. Her words were loud enough for nearby customers to hear. The waitress felt a small sting, but kept her voice calm. She explained that the restaurant focused more on food quality than appearances. She offered water again. The woman waved her hand dismissively. She asked why it took so long just to get seated and whether the staff was properly trained. Her voice carried a tone that suggested she was used to being obeyed, not questioned. Other diners began to notice. Some exchanged uncomfortable looks. A couple at the next table paused their conversation. No one said anything, but the air felt tense. The waitress nodded again. She apologized even though she had done nothing wrong. She turned to get the water, moving quickly, hoping to end the moment. When she returned, she placed the glass carefully on the table. Before she could step back, the woman inspected it closely. She complained that the water was not cold enough and asked if the glass had been properly cleaned. She held it up to the light, searching for flaws. The waitress took a slow breath. She offered to replace it right away. Her hands shook slightly, but she hid it well. The woman leaned forward and said something that cut deeper than the rest. She made a comment about how people like the waitress should be grateful to even have a job. Her words were not shouted, but they were sharp and clear. The waitress froze for a brief second. Then she nodded and said she would bring fresh water. She turned and walked away, her face warm with embarrassment. She could feel eyes on her back, but she did not look around. Behind the counter, another staff member watched with concern. Everyone in the restaurant could sense that something was wrong. Still, no one stepped in. The waitress returned to her duties, reminding herself why she needed this job and why she could not react. Back at the table, the wealthy woman sat comfortably, unaware or unconcerned about the effect of her words. She checked her phone and smiled at something on the screen. To her, the moment was already over, but for the waitress, it was only the beginning. The night had just started, and none of the waitress stood near the service counter, holding a fresh glass of water. She took a moment to steady herself before walking back. Her face looked calm, but inside, her heart was racing. She reminded herself that this was just another table, just another shift, and that she had handled worse days before. She returned to the table and gently placed the new glass down. Her voice was soft as she apologized again, even though the apology felt heavy in her chest. The woman did not respond. She was busy scrolling on her phone, her fingers moving fast, her attention somewhere far from the room. After a few seconds, the woman finally looked up. She glanced at the water and gave a short nod, as if approving a servant's work. Then she asked about the food, not with curiosity, but with doubt. She questioned whether the ingredients were fresh, and if the chef was trained well enough to cook proper meals. The waitress explained the menu carefully. She spoke about the dishes that were popular and how the restaurant took pride in simple, honest cooking. Her words were gentle, and she tried to sound confident. She pointed out a few items that many guests enjoyed. The woman interrupted her. She said she had eaten at the best places in the world and doubted this small restaurant could offer anything impressive. Her voice carried across the room again. A few people shifted in their seats. One man lowered his head, pretending to read his menu. The waitress paused, then continued. She answered questions one by one, never raising her voice. She suggested a dish made with fresh ingredients from local suppliers. The woman laughed lightly and said that local did not always mean quality. When it was time to place the order, the woman made several changes to the dish. She wanted this removed, that replaced, and the portion adjusted. Each request came with a sharp look, as if daring the waitress to make a mistake. The waitress wrote everything down carefully. She repeated the order back to make sure it was correct. The woman corrected her twice, even when the waitress had said it right. Still, the waitress nodded and apologized again. As she walked away, she felt a tightness in her chest. She had been treated like this before, but it never became easy. She wondered why some people felt the need to speak down to others. She wondered if kindness had become too rare. In the kitchen, the staff listened as the order was passed along. A few exchanged looks. They had all seen this kind of customer. They knew the signs. Someone whispered that the manager should be told. Another replied that the manager already knew and was watching closely. Out in the dining area, the woman leaned back in her chair. She looked around again, this time with a sense of control. She noticed the waitress serving other tables with a smile and seemed annoyed by it. She muttered that people like that should know their place. At a nearby table, an older woman watched quietly. She had seen the whole exchange. Her face showed concern, but she stayed silent, unsure whether speaking up would help or make things worse. The waitress returned with bread and a small dish of butter. She placed them down neatly. The woman inspected them and complained that the bread was too warm. She said it should have cooled by now. The comment made little sense, but the waitress accepted it without argument. Time passed slowly. Every few minutes, the woman found something else to criticize. The wait felt too long. The music was too soft. The lights were too dim. Each complaint chipped away at the calm feeling of the restaurant. The waitress moved between tables, doing her best to keep her focus. She smiled at other guests and helped them enjoy their meals. When she passed the kitchen door, she wiped her eyes quickly, making sure no one saw. When the food was finally ready, she carried the plate with care. She reminded herself to stay steady. She set the dish down and explained it just as she had been trained to do. The woman stared at the plate. She did not touch it right away. She poked at the food with her fork and asked if this was really the best the restaurant could do. Her words were slow and deliberate, meant to hurt. The waitress stood there, waiting. She offered to bring something else if needed. The woman shook her head and said she would try it, but only because she was hungry. As the woman took her first bite, the room felt tense. The waitress held her breath for a moment. Then she quietly stepped away, behind her calm walk. Her hands were shaking again. She did not know it yet. But this table would soon bring a turning point she could never have imagined. For now, the kitchen was alive with quiet energy. Pots clanged, and the smell of food filled the air, but everyone moved carefully, like dancers in a precise routine. The waitress had just returned from serving the wealthy woman, and she leaned against the counter for a moment, letting herself breathe. She had done everything right, yet the weight of the insults pressed on her. Her coworkers noticed. One of the older chefs, a kind man with years of experience, gave her a small nod, silently acknowledging her patience. Another staff member whispered encouragement, reminding her she had handled the situation gracefully. It helped, but only slightly. She felt the sting of every word the woman had said. The manager watched from the side, his expression serious. He had been debating whether to intervene, but he also knew that the owner would soon arrive, and any sudden move could cause trouble.